The stranger asked her one question at closing time, and somehow it unlocked the part of her life she had spent years trying to keep hidden. At 11 o'clock on a snowy Tuesday night in Boston, Megan Carter was the last employee still awake inside the Eastbrook Community Library. The old radiators knocked softly beneath the windows. Snow gathered in pale sheets against the glass. Most of the overhead lights were already off, leaving only the reading lamps glowing along the back wall, where forgotten books waited in little stacks, and the carpet smelled faintly of dust, coffee, and winter coats. Megan moved through the aisles with a cart of returned books, her cardigan pulled tight around her shoulders, her name tag tilted crookedly from a 10-hour shift. She should have been tired enough to think about nothing. Instead, every quiet corner of the library seemed to remind her of a bill she had not paid, a publisher who had not answered, a dream she had not managed to bury. In the pocket of her canvas bag sat her red notebook, soft at the corners, its elastic band stretched from too many nights of being opened after midnight. She had written in it during lunch breaks, bus rides, hospital waiting rooms, and cold mornings when her rented room had no heat because the landlord kept promising repairs next week. The notebook had belonged to her mother once, back when her mother still believed stories could keep a person alive. Megan had almost believed it too. Then came 16 rejection letters, 16 different versions of no, 16 polite little doors closing on the only future she had ever wanted. She pushed the cart past the history shelf and noticed a man still sitting at the final reading table near the tall windows. He had not moved in nearly an hour. He wore a dark wool coat that looked worn at the cuffs but expensive in its cut, and his brown hair was slightly messy, as if he had walked too long in the snow before coming inside. A closed book rested under one hand. He had not read a page. Megan stopped beside the table and softened her voice. "Sir, the library is closing." The man looked up as if returning from somewhere far away. He was white, maybe mid-30s, with calm gray eyes and the tired expression of someone who had too many rooms to be alone in. Already. 5 minutes passed, actually. Megan gave him the small practice smile she used when patrons needed kindness, but not permission to stay forever. "I was trying to be generous." He glanced toward the darkened aisles. "Then I owe you 5 minutes. The city of Boston can survive without them." That almost made him smile. He closed his hand over the book, but did not stand. His gaze moved to the red notebook peeking from her bag where it sat on the return cart. "Are you writing a story?" he asked quietly. "Or hiding one?" Megan's fingers tightened around the cart handle. The question was too direct for a stranger, too close to the locked drawer inside her chest. Most people ask where the restroom is. Most people are less interesting at closing time. "You do not know me." "No," he said. "But I know the difference between someone who carries a notebook for appointments and someone who carries one like a lifeboat." The word lifeboat made her look away first. Outside, snow drifted past the window in slow white fragments, and for a moment the library felt suspended from the rest of the city. No landlord. No rejection emails. No secondhand laptop waiting upstairs with half-finished typing jobs and overdue invoices. Just warm lamps, old books, and a man who had somehow seen the one object she still treated like a heartbeat. "It is nothing," she said. "Nobody carries nothing that carefully." Megan should have told him to leave. She should have pointed to the door, locked it behind him, and gone home to the room with the thin blanket and the radiator that only worked when it felt generous. Instead, she pulled the red notebook from her bag and held it against her chest. "It was my mother's." The stranger's expression changed. Not pity. That mattered. Pity always leaned too close and still missed the truth. He only nodded, like the sentence deserved room. Was she a writer? No. She cleaned offices downtown at night. But she read everything she could get from this library. Romances, mysteries, biographies, cookbooks, books about places she said she would visit when life stopped being expensive. Megan ran her thumb over the frayed elastic band. "She gave me this when I was 16 and told me to write down the parts of life nobody claps for." "Did you?" "I tried." She laughed softly, without humor. "Apparently, the parts of life nobody claps for are also the parts publishers do not buy." The man leaned forward slightly. "You submitted your work?" Megan looked at him then, surprised by the seriousness in his voice. 16 times. And 16 polite rejections. One editor told me my voice was honest, but too small to sell. Another said working-class stories were difficult unless there was a hook. I thought surviving was a hook, but I guess not a commercial one. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That was a cruel thing to say. It was an industry thing to say. People hide cruelty inside professional language all the time. He was silent for a moment, and Megan realized he was actually listening. Not waiting, not correcting, not preparing advice. Listening. That made the room more dangerous than if he had dismissed her. She opened the notebook before she could change her mind and turned to a page marked with a grocery receipt. "This is not the best part," she said. "Good." His answer startled her. "Why good?" "Because people usually protect the best part. They reveal the true one." Megan stared at him, then slowly slid the notebook across the table. He did not grab it. He waited until her hand moved away, then turned it toward the lamp. As he read, the library clock ticked behind the front desk. Megan watched his face, bracing for the polite nod, the vague compliment, the quick escape. But he did not escape. He read about a girl who came to a library not because she loved books at first, but because the heat was free, the chairs were soft, and nobody asked why her coat was too thin. He read about a mother who believed a borrowed book could make a poor room feel wider. He read about shame, hunger, hope, and the stubborn little miracle of having a place to sit where no one charged by the hour. When he finished, he did not speak for so long that Megan felt exposed down to the bone. "You can say it is too small," she whispered. "I have heard it before." He looked up, and his eyes were not calm anymore. "No. I was trying to understand how anyone read this and missed how large it is." Megan forgot how to breathe for a second. Then the lights over the front desk flickered, reminding her that the building wanted to close even if something inside her had just opened. She reached for the notebook, but he saw the sentence written on the inside cover in faded blue ink before she could shut it. "A story is not over just because someone stops reading." "Your mother wrote that?" he asked. Megan nodded. "Some nights I believe it. Some nights I just keep writing because stopping feels worse." He closed the notebook gently and handed it back with both hands, as if returning something valuable. "What is your name?" "Megan. I am Daniel. No last name. No title. Just Daniel." The stranger in the corner of a library, he seemed reluctant to leave. Megan tucked the notebook into her bag. "Well, Daniel, the library really is closed now." He stood, lifting the book he had never opened. "May I borrow this?" "Only if you bring it back." His eyes held hers for a second longer than necessary. "I will." Megan wanted to believe him, which was exactly why she told herself not to. She walked him to the front doors, unlocked them, and watched snow swirl in under the streetlight. He stepped outside, then turned back. "Megan," he said, "your story is not small." The door closed before she could answer. She stood alone in the warm, dim library with her red notebook pressed to her side, unaware that the man walking into the Boston snow owned one of the largest publishing houses in the country, and that by morning, the future she thought had stopped reading would begin turning back toward her. The next morning, Megan woke to the sound of her radiator clicking like it was arguing with itself and losing. Her rented room sat above a closed tailor shop in East Boston, 3 narrow flights up, with one window facing a brick wall and a ceiling stain shaped like a map of a country nobody wanted to visit. She lay under 2 blankets, still wearing socks, and for a few seconds, she let herself remember the stranger's voice before the day could ruin it. "Your story is not small." The sentence glowed in her mind with dangerous warmth. Compliments were risky when you could not afford to believe them. They made ordinary disappointment feel personal again. Megan sat up, reached for the red notebook on the milk crate beside her bed, and touched the cover as if checking whether the night had been real. It was. The grocery receipt still marked the page she had shown Daniel. Her mother's faded sentence still waited inside the cover. "A story is not over just because someone stops reading." Megan read it once, then closed the notebook before hope could get too comfortable. On the floor near her shoes sat a stack of bills held down by a chipped mug. Rent due. Electric past due. Internet warning. Pharmacy receipt for her Aunt Elaine's medication, because Elaine had taken Megan in after her mother died and Megan had been trying to repay a lifetime of kindness in $20 pieces ever since. The library job covered barely enough to keep her room. The typing work covered groceries if clients paid on time. Dreams covered nothing. By 8, she was at a cramped print shop near the subway, transcribing interviews for a law office at $12 an hour. headphones pressed over her ears while strangers' voices filled her morning. At noon, she ate a peanut butter sandwich on the bench outside because the break room smelled like toner and burnt coffee. At 2, she checked her email and found another rejection. Thank you for allowing us to review your manuscript. Unfortunately, we do not feel this project is the right fit for our list at this time. The words were so familiar they no longer cut cleanly. They bruised. She scrolled down to the signature. Whitmore House, Junior Editorial Department. Her stomach tightened. Whitmore House was the one she had wanted most. The one with beautiful hardcovers and bookstore windows and author photos that looked like people who had never worried about bus fare. She had sent them her manuscript 6 months ago, then again after a conference volunteer told her working-class fiction was trending if packaged correctly. Packaged. As if life came in a box with ribbon. Megan deleted the email, then restored it from the trash because even rejection felt like proof she had tried. By evening, snow had turned to slush along the curbs, and the library windows glowed amber against the early dark. Eastbrook Community Library was not impressive by wealthy standards. Its steps were cracked. The front doors stuck in damp weather. The children's carpet had faded planets on it, and the elevator groaned like it had opinions. But to Megan, it was the closest thing Boston had to a public heartbeat. Warmth without purchase, tables without rent, light without asking who you knew. She arrived for her shift with the red notebook in her bag and Daniel's borrowed book noted in the checkout system under the name he had given her. Only Daniel. No phone number, no address because the system had been down and she had written it by hand like a fool. Her coworker, Lisa, was already at the desk, peeling an orange over a napkin. You look like you slept in a refrigerator. Luxury refrigerator or regular? Regular. Then yes. Lisa smiled, then lowered her voice. Board meeting notice came in. City partnership review next week. Megan's hands paused over the return bin. For what? Lisa looked toward the entrance, as if the walls might report them. Funding. Building lease. Some development group wants this block included in a mixed-use proposal. Apartments, retail, maybe a private art space. Megan stared at her. Private art space. Instead of a library. They did not say instead. They never say instead until the locks change. Lisa sighed. Public meeting Thursday. Megan looked around the room. At the older man reading newspapers because he could not afford subscriptions. At the college student charging her laptop near the history shelves. At the mother helping her son sound out a sentence under her breath. At the back table where Daniel had sat with a closed book and eyes that saw too much. Something cold moved through her. Places like this did not disappear all at once. They were reviewed, reimagined, repurposed, and then one day the people who needed them found glass doors, private security, and coffee that cost $7. After closing, Megan stayed behind to shelve books in the same back corner. She told herself she was not looking for Daniel. She told herself that 3 times, which made it less convincing each time. The table was empty. The chair was pushed in. No dark coat, no borrowed book, no quiet voice asking if she was writing or hiding. She felt ridiculous for the disappointment that followed. He was a stranger. Strangers did not owe returns just because they listened well in warm libraries during snowstorms. Still, when she sat at the table near midnight and opened the red notebook, his sentence returned before her own did. Your story is not small. Megan picked up her pen and wrote one line. The library was where people came when the world charged too much for being alive. She stared at it, then kept going. She wrote about the radiator in her rented room, the rejection email from Whitmore House, the woman counting coins at the copier, the boy asleep on his backpack because home was too loud, the old man who wore a tie every Monday to read the classifieds as if dignity required an appointment. She wrote until her fingers cramped and the snow outside began falling again, softer this time. When she finally closed the notebook, Daniel still had not returned. But the page was full. For one night, that had to be enough. Daniel returned 3 nights later with the borrowed book in his hand and snow on the shoulders of his coat, just when Megan had convinced herself he had become another unfinished sentence. The library was nearly empty, the kind of quiet that only arrived after 9:30, when students packed their laptops, mothers zipped small coats, and the old men who read newspapers folded the city back into tired rectangles. Megan was behind the front desk taping a torn dust jacket when the door opened and cold air slipped across the floor. She looked up, prepared to say the library closed in 90 minutes, but the words stopped when she saw him. He stood just inside the entrance, darker against the winter light, holding the book like a promise he had almost been late keeping. "I brought it back," he said. Megan glanced at the checkout slip on the desk, then at him. "You found the place again." I remembered. "That is not the same thing." His mouth softened. "No, it is not." She took the book from him, careful not to let her relief show. "Did you read it this time, or did you only use it as a reason to return?" "Both." That answer should have annoyed her. Instead, it made something warm and foolish move under her ribs. She scanned the book into the system, even though his record still had no last name, no address, no proof that he existed beyond a first name written in her own hand. "You missed the excitement," she said. The copier jammed twice. A teenager tried to microwave soup in the staff room, and the city might turn this place into luxury apartments with a tasteful reading lounge. Daniel's expression changed almost imperceptibly. "Is that certain?" Nothing is certain when developers talk. They use words like partnership and review until people stop paying attention. Then one day the shelves are gone, and someone is selling $9 muffins where the children's section used to be. He looked toward the back of the library, where a boy in a winter hat slept over an open textbook. "Does this place matter that much?" Megan stared at him. "That is a rich person question." The words came out before she could soften them. Daniel did not flinch, but he did go still. "What makes you say that?" "Because people who have always had warm rooms ask whether public warm rooms matter." She reached for a stack of return cards and straightened them too hard. "Sorry, that was rude." It was clear. Clear can still be rude. "I would rather hear clear." Megan looked at him, trying to decide whether he meant that or was simply good at sounding meaningful. He had the careful attention of someone educated, the stillness of someone used to being heard, and shoes too fine for a man who claimed nothing about himself. But his coat cuffs were damp, his hair was wind-tossed, and his eyes still carried the same tired honesty from the night he read her page. She wanted to ask who he really was. Instead, she asked, "Why did you come back?" Daniel looked at the red notebook beside her elbow. "Because I kept thinking about what you wrote." Megan's hand moved over the cover without thinking. "You read one page. One honest page can do more than 3 polished chapters." She gave a small laugh. "That sounds like something people say right before rejecting the rest." "I am not rejecting it." "You cannot reject what I have not given you." He nodded. "That is fair." The clock above the desk clicked toward 10. Lisa had already left, and the security guard was downstairs checking the community room. Megan should have stayed behind the desk, where employees belonged. Instead, when Daniel looked toward the back reading table, she found herself saying, "5 minutes. You keep giving me 5 minutes. You keep arriving like someone who needs them." They sat at the same table near the windows. Outside, Boston moved behind falling snow, headlights soft and distant. Megan opened the red notebook, not to the page he had read before, but to one she had written the night he did not come back. She hesitated. Daniel noticed, but did not reach. That mattered. He waited for her to choose. "This one is not pretty," she said. "Good. You said that last time." "I meant it last time." Megan turned the notebook toward him. The page began with the line she had written after the rejection from Whitmore House. The library was where people came when the world charged too much for being alive. Daniel read slowly. Megan watched his eyes move across the page, watched the muscles in his jaw tighten when he reached the part about the woman counting coins at the copier, the boy asleep on his backpack, the old man wearing a tie to read job listings because dignity needed a uniform even when nobody was hiring. He read about Megan's mother sitting in the corner during winter storms, pretending she loved the library for books alone when really it was the only place she could take her daughter after work that was bright, warm, and free. When he finished, he did not compliment her right away. He closed his eyes for 1 second, as if the page had not entertained him but entered him. "This is not small," he said finally. Megan looked down at the table. "You already said that. I am saying it again because someone taught you not to believe it." Her throat tightened. 16 rejections teach a lot. They may have taught the wrong lesson. That is easy to say when your dreams are not printed in form letters. Daniel touched the edge of the notebook, then pulled his hand back before crossing a boundary. "May I ask what is written on the inside cover again?" Megan stiffened, then opened it herself. Her mother's handwriting appeared in faded blue ink, uneven but firm. A story is not over just because someone stops reading. Daniel read the sentence as if committing it to memory. Do you believe her? Megan breathed out slowly. Some nights I do. Some nights I think she wrote it because she knew the world would stop reading people like us first. And tonight, she looked around the library, at the lamps, the shelves, the sleeping boy, the snow at the windows, and this stranger whose attention felt both dangerous and kind. Tonight I believe that stopping would hurt worse. Daniel nodded, and there was something in his face she did not understand, something like decision wrapped in restraint. Then do not stop. Megan closed the notebook. Do not say that unless you know what it costs. I do not, he said quietly, but I want to learn. Before she could answer, the downstairs guard called her name, reminding her it was time to lock the side entrance. Megan stood too quickly, collecting the notebook like she had revealed too much. Daniel rose as well. At the front doors, he stepped back into the snow, but this time he paused with his hand on the handle. Megan, if people stop reading, it does not mean the story failed. She tried to smile. You sound very sure for a man with no last name. Something like guilt crossed his eyes, so quick she almost missed it. Good night, Megan. He left before she could ask. She locked the door behind him and watched him disappear into the Boston cold, not knowing that Daniel Whitmore had just heard the first voice in years that made him ashamed of the publishing empire carrying his name. Daniel did not come back the next night, or the night after that, and Megan hated how quickly absence became a place she kept looking toward. At first, she told herself the snow had delayed him. Then she told herself he was busy. Then she told herself the truth she should have trusted from the beginning. Strangers could be kind for 5 minutes and still vanish before they owed you anything. The borrowed book had been returned, the front doors had been locked, and the red notebook was still hers. That should have been the end of it. But every evening when the library softened into its final hour, Megan caught herself glancing at the back reading table near the windows. Empty chair, quiet lamp, no dark coat, no gray eyes, no voice telling her the story was not small. By Friday, she stopped saving 5 minutes she had never promised to anyone. She worked her shift, shelved returns, helped a college student print a scholarship form, and showed an older woman how to renew a library card online. She smiled when people needed smiles. She answered questions. She did not open the red notebook until after midnight, when the building was locked and the radiators knocked under the windows like tired bones. Then she wrote one sentence and crossed it out. Some people only read enough to leave. The next morning brought the first real blow. A notice appeared on the library's front doors, printed on city letterhead and taped beneath the winter hours. Public community review regarding proposed redevelopment partnership for Eastbrook Block. Megan stood on the steps with her tote bag hanging from one shoulder while commuters passed behind her in slushy boots. Her breath fogged in the cold. She read the notice twice, then a third time, because the words were too polished to be honest. Redevelopment, partnership, cultural access space, mixed-use housing, private investment. There it was, wrapped in professional language, the slow erasure of the only place in the neighborhood where nobody had to buy something to stay warm. Inside, Lisa was already at the desk with red eyes and a coffee she had not touched. They are saying nothing is final, she said before Megan could ask. Which means they are trying to keep us calm until it is. Megan looked toward the children's corner, where paper snowflakes hung unevenly from the ceiling. When is the meeting? Tuesday night. Who is behind it? Lisa slid a folder across the desk. Megan opened it and saw a list of development partners, city consultants, and one investment group she did not recognize. Near the bottom, in smaller print, was a name that made her pause only because she had seen it in her rejection email. Whitmore Cultural Trust, affiliated with Whitmore Media Group. A strange cold feeling moved through her, but she had no reason to connect it to Daniel. Whitmore was a common enough rich name in Boston, the kind printed on museum walls and scholarship plaques. Rich names were everywhere if you were poor enough to notice who owned the rooms. She closed the folder. They want to replace a library with a private arts lounge and call it Access. Lisa gave a tired laugh. Maybe they will let us visit if we wear nice shoes. Megan spent the rest of the day helping patrons who did not know yet that the floor under them had begun to shift. A mother asked whether story time would continue in the spring. A retired teacher donated a box of paperbacks and apologized that they were old. A man who came in every afternoon to use the computer asked if someone could help him format a resume. Megan helped them all and felt something angry and protective gather behind her ribs. That night, in her rented room above the closed tailor shop, she searched the names from the folder on her secondhand laptop. Whitmore Media Group filled the screen in clean fonts and expensive confidence. Publishing houses, film rights, literary prizes, author retreats. A smiling photograph of Daniel Whitmore, 36, Millionaire and Chief Executive Officer, appeared beside an article about the future of storytelling. Megan stared at the image until her body went very still. It was him. Cleaner haircut, sharper suit, no snow on his shoulders, but the same eyes, the same mouth that had said her story was not small, the same man who had sat at her library table and listened while she handed him the softest part of herself. Her stomach turned. She clicked away, then clicked back because disbelief needed proof to hurt properly. Daniel was not just a stranger who had disappeared. He was a millionaire whose name lived inside the company connected to the project that could close her library. The room seemed smaller than before, the radiator louder, the stack of bills more awake. Megan reached for the red notebook, then stopped. Had he known? Had he come to study the place before buying it? Had her pages become research to him? A little working-class sadness for a boardroom presentation about cultural impact? She wanted the answer to be no so badly that she did not trust it. Then the second blow arrived in her email the next morning. A publishing newsletter announced Whitmore House's upcoming lead title for fall, a literary debut about a young woman surviving winter nights in a public library while writing her way out of poverty. Megan read the description once. Then again, her hands went cold. It was not her manuscript exactly. Different city, different names, different ending. But the bones were familiar enough to make her feel as if someone had opened her chest and rearranged what belonged to her. She found the editor's name beneath the announcement. Laura Pierce, Senior Acquisitions Editor at Whitmore House. Megan remembered that name from one of the rejection letters. Laura had called her work sincere, but commercially limited. Now a more famous author was being praised for a premise Megan had lived. She closed the laptop and sat in silence. Outside, Boston traffic moved through dirty snow. Somewhere, Daniel Whitmore had returned to a world where stories could be bought, branded, and launched. Megan looked at the red notebook on her bed, at her mother's faded sentence inside the cover, and for the first time, the words felt less like comfort and more like a dare. A story is not over just because someone stops reading. Megan picked up her pen with shaking fingers and wrote beneath it. But what if someone steals the page before they finish? By Tuesday night, Eastbrook Community Library was so full that people stood between the shelves, along the walls, and in the hallway outside the meeting room where the city had set up 2 folding tables and a microphone that kept humming whenever anyone touched it. Megan stood near the back with her red notebook pressed against her coat, feeling the whole neighborhood breathe around her. Parents held children's backpacks. Students leaned against book carts. Retired teachers, bus drivers, grocery clerks, nurses from the late shift, and older men who came every morning for newspapers filled the room with the quiet anger of people used to being asked to prove why they deserved what others inherited without question. At the front, a city representative spoke in the polished voice of someone trained to make loss sound like opportunity. He talked about revitalization, cultural partnerships, premium residential spaces, and a modern reading lounge that would preserve the spirit of the library. Megan heard that phrase and almost laughed. Preserve the spirit. People with money loved preserving the spirit of a thing after removing the people who gave it one. Lisa sat beside the circulation desk, jaw tight, hands folded so hard her knuckles had gone pale. When the representative opened the floor for public comments, Mrs. Donnelly, a retired teacher, spoke about teaching children to read in the basement during summer programs. A college student talked about finishing scholarship essays on the library computers because her family did not have internet at home. An older man named Mr. Alvarez said he came every morning not just for the newspaper, but because after his wife passed, this was the only place where someone still said good morning and meant it. The room grew quieter with every story. Then Lisa looked back at Megan, and Megan knew she could not hide behind the shelves anymore. She walked to the microphone with the red notebook in one hand. Her heart beat so hard she could feel it in her throat. The city representative smiled with gentle impatience. Please state your name for the record. Megan adjusted the microphone. Megan Carter, library assistant, tenant 3 blocks east. Rejected writer, If that matters, though apparently it matters only when someone more marketable tells the same story. A murmur moved through the room. The representative blinked, unsure whether to interrupt. Megan looked past him to the faces in the rows. This library is not a building full of old shelves. It is the place people come when the rest of the city has priced them out of being human. It is heat in winter, light after school, a computer for a job application, a chair where nobody asks what you bought, a table where a girl can write because her rented room is too cold, and because her mother once believed words could open a door money kept locked. Her voice shook, then steadied. You call it underused because you measure use in profit. We measure it in people who would have nowhere else to go. The room went still. Someone near the children's section whispered, "That is right." Megan opened her red notebook and held it up. My mother wrote one sentence in this notebook before she died. A story is not over just because someone stops reading. I used to think that was about me. Now I think it is about places like this. You stop reading us. That does not mean our story is over. For one suspended second, the silence felt alive. Then the back doors opened. Cold air slipped into the room, and every head turned. Daniel walked in wearing a black suit, a dark overcoat, and the kind of controlled expression that belonged in magazine profiles and boardrooms, not beneath the flickering lights of a public library meeting. Two aides followed him, along with a woman in a tailored camel coat, whom Megan recognized from the Whitmore House announcement photo. Laura Pierce. The city representative straightened instantly. "Mr. Whitmore, thank you for joining us." The name hit the room first. Then it hit Megan, harder than it had on the laptop screen, because now he was not a photograph she could close. He was standing 15 feet away, the same man who had read her pages, the same man who had returned a library book in the snow, the same man who had asked whether she was writing a story or hiding one. Daniel's eyes found hers, and whatever power he carried into the room cracked at the edges. "Megan," he said softly, forgetting for one dangerous second that everyone could hear him. Lisa turned sharply. The city representative looked from Daniel to Megan with sudden interest. Laura Pierce's gaze narrowed, quick and cold. Megan lowered the notebook. The room around her blurred into shelves, coats, whispers, and bright public lights. She thought of him sitting at the back table with no last name. She thought of his careful listening. She thought of Whitmore House calling her manuscript commercially limited while launching a prettier version of her pain. She thought of the development folder with his family name printed near the bottom. Her voice, when it came, was quiet enough that the microphone had to carry it. "So you did have a last name." Daniel took one step forward. "I should have told you. Before or after I handed you my story?" His face tightened. People began whispering again, but Megan did not look away. The betrayal did not feel loud. It felt cold, precise, like a key turning in a lock from the wrong side. Daniel turned toward the city representative, then back to her. "I did not know about the manuscript issue until yesterday. I did not know the redevelopment plan involved closing this library." Megan gave a small, stunned laugh. "You own the company, and you did not know what it was taking." The question landed in the room like a verdict. Daniel had no answer fast enough to save him. Laura stepped forward smoothly. "This is clearly an emotional misunderstanding. Miss Carter submitted work that was reviewed and declined through standard channels. Any similarities with an upcoming title are coincidental." Megan looked at Laura then, really looked at her, and saw not guilt, but calculation. "You called my story too small to sell." Laura's smile did not change. Many writers struggle to separate personal attachment from market reality. The words burned, but Megan stood straighter. And many editors hide theft inside market language. Gasps moved through the rows. The city representative reached for the microphone, but Daniel raised one hand, stopping him. His eyes stayed on Megan, no longer guarded, no longer pretending. "I will open a full investigation." "Do not investigate me into silence," Megan said. "Do not turn my pain into a private memo and my library into your public redemption." Daniel looked wounded, but she was past caring whether truth bruised him. "I trusted you with the only thing I had that still felt like mine." She closed the red notebook against her chest. "And now I have to wonder if you were listening or collecting." The room fell silent again. Daniel stood before her with all his wealth, all his influence, all his polished power, and for once none of it could buy the 5 minutes she had freely given him. Megan stepped away from the microphone and walked down the center aisle, past the neighbors who had heard her, past the man who had hidden his name, past Laura Pierce's thin smile, and out into the Boston snow with her notebook held tight, certain of only one thing. If her future was going to be rewritten, it would not be by someone who had not yet learned how to tell the truth. Daniel found Megan outside the library beneath the street lamp, standing in the snow as if the cold was the only honest thing left in the night. She had not gone far. The meeting was still murmuring behind the glass doors, full of neighbors, city officials, reporters from local blogs, and people who now had a new scandal to carry home. Megan stood on the sidewalk with her red notebook pressed to her coat, her breath turning white in the air, her eyes fixed on the slush at the curb. Daniel stepped out without his aides, without Laura Pierce, without the careful shield of people who usually arrived before consequences could reach him. For the first time since she had met him, he looked exactly like what he was, a wealthy man who had mistaken silence for caution and power for distance. "Megan," he said. She did not turn around. "Do not say my name like it still belongs in your mouth." The words were quiet, but they stopped him more effectively than shouting could have. Snow gathered on the shoulders of his overcoat. Behind them, a bus hissed at the corner, its windows glowing yellow, full of tired people going home to lives nobody would call commercially limited because nobody rich enough had tried to sell them. Daniel took one careful step closer, leaving several feet between them. "You are right to be angry." Megan gave a small laugh that held no warmth. "That must be convenient. Saying I am right costs nothing. I am not trying to escape what I did. You did not do anything. That is the problem. You owned the rooms, the doors, the locks, the letterhead, and somehow you did not know what was happening to people outside them." Daniel looked down, and the silence that followed was the first answer that sounded true. "I came to Eastbrook because I thought our company had lost touch with real readers," he said. "I wanted to see places that still mattered without a camera crew, without staff arranging what I was supposed to notice. So you disguised yourself as ordinary. I did not think of it that way. That is because you have never had ordinary taken from you." He absorbed that like he deserved it. "I should have told you my last name the first night." Megan turned then, her eyes bright but steady. "No, you should have told me before I gave you my pages. Before I said my mother cleaned offices. Before I told you 16 people had rejected me. Before I let you read the one thing I still trusted." Daniel's face tightened. "I did not know Laura had seen your manuscript. But she had." "Yes. And now Whitmore House is launching a book that sounds like my life with better lighting. I saw the announcement yesterday. I started an internal review immediately." "An internal review." Megan repeated the phrase as if it tasted bitter. "That is what people like you call pain when you put it in folders." He looked wounded, but this time he did not defend himself. "Then let me do more than review it. I can stop the publication until we know exactly what happened. I can bring in outside counsel. I can protect your work." "Protect it from your company?" "Yes." "That is not comforting." He nodded slowly. "I know." The library doors opened behind them, and warm noise spilled briefly into the street before closing again. Daniel glanced back once, then returned his attention to her. "The redevelopment proposal will be frozen by morning. I will pull Whitmore Cultural Trust from the plan unless the library is preserved as a public space. Not a lounge, not a private reading room, a real library." Megan searched his face. "Because it is right, or because I made you look bad in front of a room full of people?" The question struck exactly where she meant it to. "Because it is right," he said, "and because you made me see how wrong it was. Those are not the same thing." "No, but one can lead to the other if I let it." Megan looked away first, not because he had convinced her, but because some exhausted part of her wanted him to be capable of becoming the man his voice had promised in the quiet. That made her angrier. Wanting made judgment harder. Daniel reached into his coat and pulled out a business card, then seemed to realize how absurd it looked and lowered it. "I can help with your rent while this is happening." Her eyes snapped back to him. "No, Megan, your job may be affected. Your name may be pulled into something public. You should not have to carry that alone. Do not make my poverty the easiest part for you to fix." He went still. She took a step toward him, not afraid, not softened. "Money is your language. So of course you want to speak it first. Pay the rent. Offer a lawyer. Offer a contract. Offer a door into the same house that ignored me until you liked my sadness in person. That is not what this is." "Then what is it?" He hesitated, and in that hesitation she heard the truth. Even he did not fully know yet. "I want to make it right." You cannot make it right by buying the ending. Daniel's voice dropped. Then tell me what right looks like. Megan held up the red notebook between them. Right looks like my story staying mine. Right looks like Laura Pierce answering for what she did if she did it. Right looks like every email, every submission record, every meeting note brought into the light. Right looks like this library remaining public without my face becoming your redemption poster. Right looks like you telling the truth even if it costs Whitmore house money. He listened to each demand as if she were placing stones in his hands. And after that, maybe I decide whether I ever speak to you again. Pain crossed his expression, but he nodded. That is fair. Megan almost laughed. Stop sounding noble. I am not giving you a scene where the millionaire apologizes and the poor girl forgives him under falling snow. For the first time, his mouth moved with something close to sadness. I was not expecting forgiveness. Good. She stepped back toward the curb, clutching the notebook to her chest. Because you heard my story when you looked like nobody. Now you want to fix it because you are somebody. That does not make you kind, Daniel. It makes you late. A taxi rolled past, splashing slush near the gutter. Daniel did not move. Megan turned and walked toward the bus stop, her shoes wet, her hands cold, her future uncertain but still in her grip. Behind her, Daniel stood beneath the library lights with no applause, no answer, and no disguise left to hide behind. For the first time in years, the owner of Whitmore Media Group understood that power could open doors, but it could not enter a heart it had failed to respect. By morning, Megan learned that humiliation did not arrive like a storm. It arrived as a link sent by someone who did not know whether to pity her or watch her fall. Lisa texted first, just after 7, with 3 words, "Please do not panic." That was how Megan knew she should. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed above the closed tailor shop, the radiator clicking weakly beside her, and opened the article on her phone with a thumb that already felt numb. The headline was cruel in the bright, casual way the internet preferred. Library worker claims millionaire publisher took her story after secret meetings. There was no proof in it, only suggestion dressed as reporting. An unnamed source from Whitmore House said Megan had submitted an unpolished manuscript that had been declined through normal channels. Another source claimed she had developed a personal fixation after learning Daniel Whitmore's identity. A paragraph near the end described her as a struggling employee with financial problems, as if rent and medicine made a person less trustworthy. Megan read the sentence twice, then placed the phone face down on the blanket because the room seemed to tilt. Her private poverty had become public decoration. Her mother's notebook, her nights in the library, her rejected pages, even the 5 minutes she had given a stranger at closing time had been twisted into something small and hungry. By 8:30, the library director called. His voice was gentle, which made it worse. He said the city was receiving questions. He said the board wanted to avoid distraction before the funding review. He said it would be best if Megan took a few days away from public-facing shifts while things were clarified. He did not say she was being punished. People rarely did when they were doing it neatly. Megan thanked him because manners were sometimes the last coat dignity had left, then ended the call and stared at her work shoes by the door. A few days away meant fewer hours. Fewer hours meant rent slipping farther out of reach. Rent was not an idea to Megan. It was a date circled in red. It was the landlord's note already waiting under her door when she came downstairs to check the mail. Payment required by Friday to avoid further action. Further action. Another clean phrase for a dirty feeling. She folded the note and put it in her pocket, then walked to the print shop for her daytime typing job, where 2 coworkers grew quiet when she entered. One asked if she was all right. The other pretended not to look at her phone. By lunch, a second article appeared, shorter and meaner, calling her the poor girl who invented a millionaire connection. Megan sat in the back room with a vending machine sandwich untouched in front of her and felt something inside her begin to shrink. Not because she believed them, but because she understood how many people would. A rich man could make a mistake and still be complicated. A poor woman could tell the truth and still be called desperate. That evening, she did not go to the library. She took the long way home, past Eastbrook's glowing windows, past the children's paper snowflakes still hanging inside, past the back table where Daniel had once read her page like it mattered. She saw reporters near the entrance and crossed the street before they could see her. Her phone buzzed again and again. Unknown number. Unknown number. Daniel once, then twice, then one message she did not open. At home, the room felt colder than usual, or maybe she had carried the cold in with her. She placed the red notebook on the bed and stood over it. For the first time since her mother had given it to her, Megan felt tired of protecting it. Every page had cost something. Sleep, hope, pride, privacy. And now the world had found a way to make even that look foolish. She opened the notebook to the inside cover. A story is not over just because someone stops reading. The sentence looked unbearably brave, almost unfair. What if they keep reading it wrong? She whispered to the empty room. No answer came. Only traffic beyond the window, the radiator's thin complaint, the city moving on without asking who it had stepped over. Megan picked up the notebook and walked to the small trash can beside the desk. She held it above the rim. Her hands trembled. If she let go, she could stop fighting to be believed. She could become practical, quiet, safe. She could work, pay what she could, and stop giving strangers pieces of herself they could turn into headlines. But then a loose page slipped from the notebook and fell open on the floor. It was the page Daniel had read the second night, the one that began with the line about the library being where people came when the world charged too much for being alive. Beneath it, in the margin, Megan had written after he left, for Mom, for Eastbrook, for anyone told their life is too small. She lowered the notebook slowly. Tears filled her eyes, but they did not break her voice when she finally spoke. No. She placed the red notebook back on the desk, opened her laptop, and created a folder labeled proof. Then she began gathering every submission receipt, every rejection email, every draft timestamp, every note from Whitmore House, and every version of the manuscript she had saved because poverty had taught her never to throw away evidence. Outside, snow started again, light against the brick wall beyond her window. Megan did not know whether Daniel would tell the truth. She did not know whether Whitmore House would protect its name or expose its own failure. But she knew this. Laura Pierce had tried to turn her story into a joke, and jokes ended when the laughing stopped. Megan Carter was not done speaking. The proof folder reached Daniel at 2:17 in the morning, sent from Megan's old laptop, while the city outside her window slept under a thin cover of snow. She did not write a long message. She attached the files, then typed only one sentence. If you meant what you said, start with the truth. Daniel read it alone in his office on the 41st floor of Whitmore Media Group, where the windows showed Boston glittering below like a city made of cold promises. Around him were framed book covers, awards, photographs with famous authors, and shelves filled with stories his company had turned into fortunes. For years, he had believed ownership meant responsibility in some broad, polished way. That night, with Megan's submission receipts open on his screen and Laura Pierce's internal notes beside them, responsibility became painfully specific. The timestamps were clear. Megan's manuscript had arrived first. Laura had rejected it, then circulated a summary to a private acquisitions meeting. Months later, the upcoming lead title had been shaped around the same emotional frame, the same library setting, the same working-class voice softened and repackaged for a safer market. It was not a misunderstanding. It was not coincidence dressed in good faith. It was a system protecting the person with the stronger name and taking from the person it thought no one would believe. By sunrise, Daniel had hired outside legal reviewers, frozen the fall title, suspended Laura Pierce, and removed Whitmore Cultural Trust from the redevelopment partnership unless Eastbrook remained a fully public library. But he knew paperwork would not be enough. Megan had warned him not to investigate her into silence. So on Thursday evening, while cameras waited outside and neighbors filled the same meeting room where Megan had been humiliated, Daniel stood at the front of Eastbrook Community Library without a podium grand enough to hide behind. He wore a simple charcoal suit, no entourage standing close, no glossy banner, no image of Megan on the wall. Lisa sat near the circulation desk. Mrs. Donnelly folded her hands in her lap. Mr. Alvarez stood near the newspapers with his tie perfectly straight. Megan stood at the very back, coat still on, red notebook held at her side, ready to leave if the room turned into theater. Daniel saw her, but he did not call attention to her. That was the first thing he did right. He faced the room and spoke clearly. My company failed this library, and my publishing house failed a writer who trusted the process to be fair. The room did not move. Cameras clicked softly. Daniel continued. A manuscript submitted by Megan Carter was reviewed by Whitmore House before an upcoming project with substantial similarities was developed. The evidence shows that her work was dismissed publicly while elements of it were used internally. That was wrong. It was not a market decision. It was not an unfortunate overlap. It was a breach of trust. Laura Pierce was not there. Her absence felt like a shadow with a name. Daniel looked toward the reporters. Laura Pierce has been terminated from her position. The upcoming title has been halted pending full legal review, and Whitmore House will compensate the affected writer through a process led by outside counsel, not by my personal preference or private influence. Megan's fingers tightened around the notebook, but she stayed still. Daniel took a breath. The redevelopment plan for this block will not move forward under Whitmore funding. Instead, Whitmore Cultural Trust will place those funds into a public preservation grant administered by the city and a community board, with Eastbrook residents, library staff, and patrons holding voting seats. This building will remain a public library, not a private lounge, not a decorative memory, a library. A sound moved through the room, not applause at first, but relief breaking loose in pieces. Mrs. Donnelly covered her mouth. Lisa lowered her head. Mr. Alvarez whispered, "Thank God," like a prayer and a receipt at once. Daniel did not smile. He had not come to be forgiven by a crowd. "There is one more thing," he said. "For too long, publishing has treated certain voices as valuable only after someone with status translates them. That ends at Whitmore House tonight. We are creating an independent submission fund for working writers without industry access, with paid editorial reviews, transparent rights protections, and outside oversight. No writer should have to be rich, connected, or polished into someone else before being heard." A reporter raised a hand. "Mr. Whitmore, is Megan Carter involved with you personally?" The room sharpened. Megan felt every head want to turn. Daniel's expression cooled, not with anger, but with boundary. "Miss Carter is a writer whose work deserved respect before I ever met her. Any attempt to reduce her claim to gossip is part of the same problem that brought us here." For the first time all week, Megan felt air reach the bottom of her lungs. Daniel looked down at the table, then back at the room. Money can print a book. It cannot create a voice. That voice was always hers. Silence followed, deep and full. Then applause began near the children's section, spread across the meeting room, and rolled into the hallway where people stood shoulder to shoulder beneath the old lights. Megan did not clap. She could not. Her hands were wrapped around the red notebook, and her heart was somewhere between anger and release, too tired to choose a name. When the statement ended, Daniel stepped away from the cameras and walked only far enough to stand a respectful distance from her. "I did not use your face," he said quietly. "I know. I did not offer them your forgiveness." "Good." He nodded, accepting the smallness of what he had earned. "Your story will stay yours. Any contract, if you ever want one, goes through independent counsel. Not me." Megan looked past him at the room, at the shelves still standing, at the people crying softly because a public place had survived one more attempt to make it profitable. Then she looked at Daniel. "You finally listened without taking." His eyes softened. "I am learning late." Megan held the red notebook against her coat. "Late is not the same as never." She walked past him toward Lisa, toward the neighbors who had believed her before the cameras did, and Daniel let her go. For once, he did not try to follow, fix, or finish the scene. He simply stood beneath the library lights while Megan Carter returned to her own people, her own pages, and the story that had finally been handed back to the person who wrote it. 1 year later, Eastbrook Community Library still stood on the corner where winter buses sighed at the curb and children pressed their mittened hands against the front doors before story hour. The brick had been cleaned but not replaced. The old wooden tables had been polished but not removed. The children's carpet still had faded planets, because the community board voted to keep it until the children themselves chose a new one. The elevators still groaned, though now it did so after a proper inspection, and the radiators still knocked in cold weather like the building was clearing its throat before telling one more story. On a bright October evening, every chair in the main room was filled, and people stood between the shelves the same way they had during the meeting that almost took the library away. But this time, no one had come to defend a place from being erased. They had come to celebrate a woman who had refused to be erased with it. Megan Carter stood near the front table in a simple navy dress, her red notebook beside a stack of hardcover books bearing her name. Her name, not hidden in a submission inbox, not summarized in someone else's meeting notes, not softened into a marketable version of pain. Printed in silver across the cover of a novel that had begun in a cold, rented room, in late-night shifts, in margins filled after rejection, in a library where the heat was free and hope had once felt borrowed. Lisa stood by the circulation desk with tears already threatening before the reading began. Mrs. Donnelly had brought flowers from her own garden. Mr. Alvarez wore his best tie and told everyone within 6 feet that he had known the book would happen, although he had only admitted that after it did. Megan's Aunt Elaine sat in the front row wrapped in a cream cardigan, smiling with the exhausted pride of someone who had watched a child carry too much and finally set part of it down. Daniel stood at the back near the same reading table where they had first spoken, not in the front row, not beside the cameras, not where anyone could mistake him for the reason the night mattered. He wore a dark suit, but without the polished distance that had once made him look untouchable. Over the past year, he had not tried to buy his way back into Megan's life. He had done the quieter work she demanded. He opened records. He answered hard questions. He let outside counsel handle her contract. He put money into the library fund and then stepped away from the board seat offered to him, saying the community did not need his name in order to know its own needs. He sent no grand gifts, no public declarations. Only one envelope arrived after the final legal settlement, containing the original copy of her first submission to Whitmore House, retrieved from the archive, with a note that said, "This should have been respected from the beginning." Megan had kept the note, though she had not told him that. When it was time to read, she opened the book to the first page. Her hands trembled, but not from fear. Fear had been there at the beginning. Yes, standing beside every bill, every rejection, every headline. This was different. This was the body remembering what it had survived before stepping into light. She looked out at the room, at neighbors, patrons, staff, students, old friends, new readers, and finally at Daniel in the back. He did not smile as if asking for forgiveness. He simply nodded, once, as if telling her the room was hers. Megan began to read. Her voice carried through the library, warm and steady, telling of a girl who came to a public table because the world charged too much for belonging, and a mother who believed stories could make a poor room whiter. No one moved. Even the youngest children seemed to understand that something important was passing through the air. When Megan reached the line about the library being a place where people could sit without proving their worth, Lisa covered her mouth. Elaine closed her eyes. Daniel looked down for a moment, and when he looked back up, his eyes were bright. After the reading, applause rose until it filled the old rafters. Megan signed book after book, writing names carefully, listening to people tell her what the library had meant to them, accepting hugs, flowers, and shy thank you whispers from young writers who had brought their own notebooks. Near the end of the night, when the crowd thinned and the lights softened, Daniel approached the table with one copy of her book in his hands. He waited until she looked up. "May I ask for your signature?" Megan took the book, pretending not to notice how nervous he was. "That depends. Are you reading the story this time, or hiding one?" A quiet smile touched his face. "Reading. Slowly. Properly." She opened the cover. There, tucked inside, was a small folded card. Megan recognized her mother's sentence before she unfolded it, written in Daniel's careful handwriting beneath the original words he had copied from memory. "A story is not over just because someone stops reading." Below it, he had added, "Thank you for teaching me to listen before turning the page." Megan stood very still. The noise of the library faded around them until only the soft hum of lights remained. "You remembered." "I never forgot." She looked at the red notebook on the table, then at the man who had once entered her life without a last name and nearly lost her trust because of it. "I used to think rewriting the future meant someone powerful came in and changed everything." Daniel shook his head gently. "I was wrong if I ever made it sound that way. You did help change things. You changed them first. I only stopped standing in the way." That answer settled somewhere deep in her, not as a rescue, not as a debt, but as proof of a lesson learned late and honestly. Megan picked up her pen and signed his book. For Daniel, who learned that some stories must be held with clean hands. She closed it and gave it back. He read the inscription, and the emotion in his face was quiet enough to trust. "Megan," he said, "I cannot rewrite your future. But if you let me, I would like to help protect the pages you choose to write next." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she reached for the red notebook, opened to a blank page, and tore it out carefully. She placed the page between them and handed him her pen. "Then start by writing your name," she said. "Your whole name this time." Daniel laughed softly, the sound almost breaking, and wrote Daniel Whitmore at the top of the page. Megan looked at it, then wrote her own name beside his, not beneath it. Outside, Boston moved into evening, full of headlights, brick walls, open doors, and people carrying stories no one had a right to steal. Inside Eastbrook Community Library, under the same lamps that had once watched a stranger read her first page, Megan Carter began the next chapter with her notebook open, her voice restored, and a man beside her who finally understood that love was not the power to write someone's ending, but the humility to be invited into the story.